On a crisp December morning in Maplewood, a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Washington, D.C., snow dusted the manicured lawns and glistened on the rooftops. The cul-de-sac was usually serene, its rows of identical houses standing as symbols of middle-class security. But today, the peace was shattered by the unmistakable sound of sirens. Henry Lawson, a grizzled man in his late 50s, stood on his front porch with a steaming mug of coffee. His sharp blue eyes scanned the street as a black moving truck idled across from his home. He had been watching the new neighbors for hours, his unease growing with every box carried inside by the well-dressed black man and the steady stream of stern-looking men in suits. To Henry, the situation didn't sit right. When two squad cars pulled up and uniformed officers stepped out, Henry smirked. "Finally," he muttered under his breath. About time someone checked this guy out. The man in question, Michael Carter, emerged from his house, dressed in a sharp gray overcoat. His tall frame exuded confidence, and his calm demeanor seemed unshaken by the commotion. As the police approached him, Henry decided he wasn't content to simply watch. He slammed his coffee mug down on the porch railing and stormed across the street. "You think you can just waltz in here and do whatever you want?" Henry barked as he approached Michael, pointing an accusing finger. His tone was loud and threatening, drawing the attention of both the police and curious neighbors peeking from their windows. Michael raised his hands slightly, his brow furrowed with a mix of irritation and restraint. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice measured. "I don't know what kind of operation you're running, but I've been around long enough to know when something shady's going on." Henry spat, stepping closer. His aggressive stance made one of the officers instinctively step between him and Michael. "Sir, please back up," the officer ordered, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I'm not backing up," Henry shouted. "This is my neighborhood. I called you, and you should be dealing with him, not me." Michael took a deep breath, his composure unbroken. "Officer, may I ask what I'm being accused of?" Before the officer could respond, a sleek black SUV pulled up. A woman in a tailored navy suit stepped out, her heels clicking against the icy pavement. She held up her badge, her voice cutting through the chaos with authority. "Stand down, everyone," she commanded. "Director Carter, my apologies for this incident. I came as soon as I was informed." Henry froze, his face flushing with confusion and embarrassment. The officers immediately straightened, murmuring apologies, as they stepped back from Michael. "Director Carter?" Henry stammered, his voice faltering. Michael turned to face him, his calm gaze meeting Henry's. "That's right," he said. "Michael Carter, Director of the FBI." Henry's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. The realization of his mistake and the gravity of what he had done hit him like a thunderclap. The air between Henry and Michael was thick with tension, the silence only broken by the crunch of boots on snow as the officers moved back to their cars, clearly eager to leave the scene. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some bold enough to step onto their porches for a better view of the unfolding drama. Henry, his chest heaving with anger and embarrassment, stayed rooted in place, his fists clenched at his sides. Michael, still composed, adjusted the cuffs of his coat before speaking. "It seems you've gone out of your way to welcome me to the neighborhood, mister." Henry's face darkened, his pride preventing him from answering right away. "Henry Lawson," he grumbled finally. "Well, Mr. Lawson, I suggest we take a moment to discuss this in a more civilized manner," Michael said, gesturing toward his driveway. Henry scoffed. "Civilized? You've got government cars and men in suits running all over the place. What are we supposed to think? This is a family neighborhood." Michael nodded slightly, his lips tightening into a polite but firm line. "I see. And instead of coming over to introduce yourself, you decided to involve law enforcement?" "You bet I did," Henry snapped, stepping closer. "We've had enough trouble around here without someone bringing whatever it is you're up to." At that moment, the woman who had introduced herself as Michael's deputy stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her tone sharp. "Director Carter has just returned from a classified operation. If you have any concerns, you're welcome to address them through the proper channels." Henry's jaw tightened, but he ignored her, focusing on Michael. Classified operation? You expect me to believe that? Michael sighed, clearly trying to maintain his composure. Look, he said, his voice calm but firm. I understand that seeing unfamiliar faces can be unsettling. But the fact that you assume the worst about me says more about you than it does about me. Henry's face flushed red. Don't try to make this about me. You're the one bringing trouble here. Michael's patience wore thin. He stepped closer, his imposing presence now fully commanding the space. Mr. Lawson, I have spent my entire career protecting neighborhoods just like this one from threats, both foreign and domestic. I don't need to justify myself to you, but I will tell you this. My family and I deserve the same respect as anyone else. Your actions today were reckless, and they could have had serious consequences. Henry opened his mouth to retort, but the words died in his throat as the weight of the situation began to sink in. You should be ashamed, Michael added, his voice carrying a quiet power that made Henry flinch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Michael turned and walked back toward his house, his deputy following closely behind. Henry stood in the middle of the driveway, his pride bruised and his neighbors watching in stunned silence. Inside his home, Michael's wife, Vanessa, greeted him with a concerned look. Are you okay? She asked, glancing out the window where Henry still lingered. Michael nodded, pulling off his gloves. I'm fine. Just a small-minded man who needs to learn a few lessons. Vanessa sighed. Do you think it'll stop here? Michael's jaw tightened. Doubtful, but I've dealt with worse. Later that evening, as Michael and his family tried to settle in, they could hear the faint murmurs of neighbors outside. The events of the day had clearly stirred the pot, and Michael knew it wouldn't end with just one confrontation. Henry Lawson wasn't the type to back down quietly. As Michael sat in his study, flipping through case files, he couldn't shake the feeling that his position as the new head of the FBI, and as a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood, would make his life here anything but simple. The following morning, the tranquility of Maplewood seemed restored, but the tension lingered just beneath the surface. Michael Carter sat at the breakfast table with his wife, Vanessa, and their teenage daughter, Alana. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, glinting off the unpacked boxes scattered around the room. Despite the domestic calm, Michael's mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation with Henry Lawson. I'll drive Alana to school today, Vanessa offered, breaking the silence. Michael glanced up from his coffee and nodded. That might be best, just in case there's any spillover from yesterday. Alana rolled her eyes, toying with her cereal. Dad, you know he's just a cranky old man, right? You're not actually worried about him, are you? Michael chuckled softly. Cranky old men can cause more trouble than you think, sweetheart. But no, I'm not worried, just cautious. Vanessa reached out to squeeze Michael's hand. We'll be fine, she said reassuringly. As the family prepared to start their day, Henry was already busy stirring the pot. Standing outside his house with a few of the neighbors, he regaled them with his version of the previous day's events. I'm telling you, something about that guy isn't right, Henry said, gesturing toward Michael's house. He's hiding something. Did you see the way those government agents were scurrying around? And what kind of person just moves in without introducing himself? Maybe it's not as bad as you think, offered a younger neighbor, a teacher named Julia. I mean, he's the head of the FBI. That's got to count for something, right? Henry waved her off. That's just a cover story. Nobody that high up in the government just moves into a place like this without an agenda. We need to keep an eye on him. Unbeknownst to Henry, his paranoid mutterings weren't going unnoticed. Michael, who had stepped out to retrieve the morning paper, overheard fragments of the conversation as he walked back up his driveway. He paused for a moment, his jaw tightening, then decided against confronting the group. Instead, he returned inside, filing the incident away in his mind. Later that day, as Michael sat in his home office reviewing confidential reports, his phone buzzed. It was an email flagged as urgent a potential threat assessment related to his personal safety. The email detailed the possibility of online chatter linking his new address to extremist groups. Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Moving to Maplewood was supposed to be a retreat, a place where he and his family could enjoy a semblance of normalcy. But between Henry's hostility and this new information, it was becoming clear that normal was not in the cards. Vanessa appeared at the doorway. "Michael, you've been up here for hours. Everything okay?" He looked up, managing a small smile. "Just work," he said, though the weight of the situation was evident in his tone. Vanessa stepped closer, her expression serious. "It's not just work, is it?" Michael hesitated, then handed her the tablet, displaying the email. As she read, her face hardened. "This is because of Henry, isn't it? His nonsense has made us a target." "Not entirely," Michael said, "but it doesn't help. People like him, people who spread fear and suspicion, they create openings for others to act on those feelings." Vanessa sat beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "What do we do?" Michael sighed. "We stay vigilant. I've dealt with worse threats in my career. The important thing is that we don't let people like Henry dictate how we live." Meanwhile, Henry's distrust began evolving into a full-blown obsession. He started poring over internet forums, convinced he could find proof that Michael Carter wasn't who he claimed to be. He took pictures of the government vehicles parked outside Michael's house, uploading them to conspiracy websites. What Henry didn't realize, however, was that his actions were being monitored. That evening, as Henry sat in his dimly lit study, scrolling through pages of online evidence, a knock on the door startled him. He opened it to find Michael standing on the porch, his tall frame backlit by the porch light. "Henry," Michael said evenly, his tone calm but firm, "we need to talk." Henry's heart raced, but he crossed his arms, attempting to mask his unease. "Talk about what?" Michael took a step closer. "About the rumors you're spreading, the pictures you're taking, and the websites you're posting on. You've crossed a line, and I'm here to let you know that it stops now." Henry's defiance faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained his composure. "You can't just come to my house and tell me what to do." "This is still a free country," Michael nodded. "It is. And that freedom comes with responsibilities, like not endangering your neighbors with baseless accusations. I'm giving you this chance to step back and think about the consequences of your actions." Henry stared at him, his mind racing. He knew he was in over his head, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'll do what I think is right," he said stiffly. Michael's eyes narrowed, but he remained composed. "Fair enough," he said. "But know this, I won't tolerate threats to my family. Consider this your warning." With that, Michael turned and walked away, leaving Henry standing in the doorway, his stomach knotting with a mix of anger and unease. The days following Michael's confrontation with Henry were tense. The winter air seemed charged with an unspoken conflict, and though life in Maplewood went on, it was clear the neighborhood was divided. Some residents, like Julia, took a neutral stance, believing that time would smooth over the hostility. Others quietly aligned with Henry, feeding his paranoia with nods of agreement and whispered conversations. For Michael, the real concern wasn't Henry's gossiping, but the increasing scrutiny from outside sources. The chatter on conspiracy forums that Henry had stirred up began gaining traction, drawing the attention of extremist groups. This wasn't just idle neighborhood drama anymore. It was becoming a security issue. One evening, as Michael sat in his study, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message read, "We know where you live. Leave before it's too late." Michael stared at the screen, his face impassive, but his mind raced. He forwarded the message to his FBI security team and then walked downstairs to find Vanessa. "Vanessa," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to tighten security around the house. I just received a direct threat." Vanessa's eyes widened. "This is escalating, isn't it?" Michael nodded. "It's no longer just about Henry. I think he's unwittingly attracted the wrong kind of attention." Vanessa glanced toward the window, where the shadows of the winter night seemed darker than usual. "Do you think we're safe here?" Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're prepared for situations like this. But I need you and Alana to be extra cautious. No unnecessary outings, and always keep your phones with you." Across the street, Henry was becoming increasingly reckless. His online postings had attracted a small but vocal group of conspiracy theorists who viewed him as a whistleblower, exposing a government cover-up. One of them, A man named Darren reached out to Henry directly. Darren claimed to have experience investigating deep state operatives and offered to visit Maplewood to help. Flattered by the attention, Henry agreed, failing to recognize the danger of inviting someone so volatile into his world. When Darren arrived, Henry greeted him like an old friend, ushering him into the house and showing him the pictures and notes he'd collected. Darren, however, was far from impressed. "This isn't enough," Darren said, shaking his head. "If you want people to believe you, you've got to find something concrete, proof that this guy isn't who he says he is." "What kind of proof?" Henry asked, a hint of doubt creeping into his voice. "Something personal," Darren replied. "Something that'll force him to come clean. If he's FBI, there's got to be dirt on him somewhere." Henry hesitated. The thought of digging deeper into Michael's life unsettled him, but his desire to be vindicated outweighed his reservations. "What do you suggest?" Darren grinned. "Leave that to me. You just keep an eye on him and let me know if you see anything out of the ordinary." The next day, Darren parked his old van on a side street and began surveilling Michael's house. From inside, he used a long-range camera to snap pictures of everyone coming and going. That evening, as Michael and Vanessa relaxed in the living room, Darren crept around the side of the house, attempting to peer into the windows. What he didn't realize was that Michael's home was equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, including motion detectors and night vision cameras. As Darren crouched near the back porch, a piercing alarm sounded, flooding the yard with bright lights. Startled, Darren bolted toward his van, but not before Michael stepped outside, a flashlight in one hand and a phone in the other. "Who's there?" Michael demanded, his voice cutting through the icy air. Darren froze for a moment before scrambling into his van and speeding away. Michael managed to snap a picture of the vehicle's license plate before it disappeared into the night. The next morning, Michael met with his security team. The license plate led them to Darren, whose name was already flagged in several databases for suspected involvement in extremist activities. "This guy isn't acting alone," one of the agents said. "We've seen chatter online about your move to Maplewood. They're organizing." Michael nodded grimly. "It's time to send a message." Later that day, Darren found himself arrested on multiple charges, including trespassing and harassment. The arrest made local headlines, and while Darren refused to implicate Henry, the connection was obvious. Henry's neighbors began to distance themselves from him, and whispers of disapproval grew louder. That evening, Michael decided to pay Henry one last visit. When Henry opened the door, his face fell at the sight of Michael. "What do you want now?" Henry asked, his tone defensive. "I thought you should know that your friend Darren was arrested today," Michael said, his voice steady. Henry's eyes widened, but he said nothing. "I don't know what you hope to achieve by bringing him here," Michael continued, "but your actions have put my family in danger." "And for what? Your paranoia? Your fear of something you don't understand?" Henry looked away, his face pale. Michael took a step closer. "You have a choice, Henry. You can continue down this path, or you can take a long, hard look at yourself and ask why you're so determined to see me as the enemy." Without waiting for a response, Michael turned and walked away, leaving Henry standing in his doorway, grappling with the consequences of his actions. The arrest of Darren sent shockwaves through Maplewood. What had begun as Henry's paranoid suspicions now had tangible consequences, and the neighborhood was abuzz with gossip. Some residents began openly avoiding Henry, whispering about his reckless behavior. Others quietly sympathized, but grew uneasy with the attention his actions had brought to their normally peaceful cul-de-sac. For Henry, the fallout was immediate and isolating. Neighbors who used to exchange friendly nods now avoided eye contact, and Julia, the teacher, even confronted him outside his house. "What were you thinking, Henry?" she asked, her voice filled with frustration. "Inviting a man like Darren here? Do you have any idea what kind of danger you've put us all in?" Henry bristled. "I was trying to protect this neighborhood. Someone had to do something about Carter. Protect us? You've made things worse for everyone," Julia shot back. "Michael Carter is the head of the FBI, for heaven's sake. He's not the problem, you are." Henry had no response. He watched her walk away, his chest tight with a mix of anger and shame. Meanwhile, Michael was taking measures to secure his family's safety. Increased patrols by plainclothes FBI agents discreetly monitored the area, and advanced surveillance equipment was installed at their home. For Vanessa and Alana, this new reality was both comforting and unsettling. Alana, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, expressed her frustrations one evening. "This isn't fair, Dad. Why do we have to live like this because of some crazy neighbor?" Michael leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "I know it's not fair, sweetheart," he said, "but sometimes people let fear drive them to do irrational things. The important thing is how we handle it." Alana frowned. "What if it doesn't stop? What if he keeps finding new ways to come after us?" Michael's voice was firm. "Then we'll handle it, just like we handled Darren. But I need you to trust me, okay? I won't let anything happen to this family." Vanessa chimed in, placing a reassuring hand on Alana's shoulder. "Your dad has faced tougher situations than this. We'll be okay." That night, as the Carter family tried to return to a sense of normalcy, Henry sat alone in his darkened living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The day's events replayed in his mind: the confrontation with Julia, the growing disdain from his neighbors, and the cold, piercing words Michael had left him with. For the first time, doubt began to creep into Henry's thoughts. What if he'd been wrong about Michael? What if his actions had made him the villain in this story? But before he could dwell too long on these questions, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from a private chat group he'd joined on a conspiracy forum. Darren's arrest was a setup. "Don't let them silence you. We've got your back." Henry stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The message reignited the spark of indignation in his chest. Maybe he had gone too far with Darren, but the group's words fed his lingering paranoia. He couldn't back down now, when others were counting on him to expose the truth. The following day, Henry doubled down on his efforts, sending out anonymous emails to local news outlets and community boards, accusing Michael of abusing his position to intimidate innocent citizens. While most dismissed the claims as baseless, one reporter, eager for a sensational story, reached out to Henry. In their meeting, Henry spun a web of half-truths and outright fabrications, painting himself as a whistleblower and Michael as a secretive figure with something to hide. The reporter, sensing a potential headline, promised to look into it. When the article was published a week later, its inflammatory tone caused an uproar. Though filled with unverified claims, the piece was enough to reignite the tensions in Maplewood and beyond. Michael's face was plastered on news websites, with headlines questioning his integrity. At the FBI headquarters, Michael's team was already on high alert. His deputy, Agent Karen Whitaker, stormed into his office with the article in hand. "Director, this is getting out of hand," she said, her voice sharp. "Henry Lawson is escalating, and now the media is involved. We need to act decisively." Michael set the article down, his face impassive. "What's the public reaction?" Karen sighed. "It's mixed. Most people see through it, but some are taking it seriously. And the extremist groups? They're loving it. They're using this as fuel to fan their agenda." Michael nodded slowly. "Prepare a public statement, something measured but firm, and double-check our security measures at home. If this escalates further, I want to be ready." Karen hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't just a security issue anymore. Henry Lawson has made this personal. If we don't find a way to neutralize him legally, of course, he's going to keep pushing until something breaks." Michael leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Karen was right. Henry Lawson had crossed a line, and now the stakes were higher than ever. As the situation escalated, the Carter family found themselves caught in the eye of a storm, and Henry, blinded by his own convictions, pushed forward on a path that could only lead to confrontation. The fallout from the article hit hard, reverberating through both the Carter household and Maplewood as a whole. Though most of the neighbors dismissed Henry's claims as unfounded, a vocal minority began whispering among themselves. Those whispers grew louder online, amplified by conspiracy theorists who saw an opportunity to sow discord. For Michael, the stakes had shifted. What began as a personal conflict with a paranoid neighbor was now a test of his integrity and the trust he'd built in his career. The article's insinuations, though entirely false, had created just enough doubt to cause a ripple effect. At Maplewood High School, Alana faced the consequences firsthand. She had always been well liked by her peers, but whispers followed her through the hallways now. One day, as she walked to her locker, she overheard a group of students talking. "Did you hear about her dad? They say he's abusing his power," one boy said. "Yeah, my dad read about it online," a girl added. "He thinks there's more to the story." Alana clenched her fists, trying to block out the words. But when one of the students noticed her, the conversation stopped abruptly and the group dispersed, leaving her standing alone. That evening, Alana broke down at the dinner table. "It's not fair," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Why do people believe this stuff? Why do they hate us so much?" Michael reached out to hold her hand. "Alana, people believe what they want to believe because it's easier than facing the truth. But remember this, you're not defined by what they say. You know who you are, and so do we." Vanessa chimed in, her voice steady. "And we'll get through this together. The truth always comes out in the end." While Michael worked to stabilize his family, Henry was spiraling deeper into his own obsession. The backlash from his neighbors and the arrest of Darren should have been a wake-up call, but instead, it only fueled his determination to uncover the truth. Late one night, Henry received an anonymous email. The message was cryptic, but promised access to classified information about Michael Carter. Included was a link to a secure chat room. Without thinking twice, Henry clicked it. Inside the chat room, users claimed to have insider knowledge of Michael's past. They shared grainy photos, snippets of out-of-context government documents, and wild theories about his supposed ulterior motives. Though much of it was fabricated, it gave Henry the ammunition he was looking for. But what Henry didn't realize was that the chat room wasn't as anonymous as he thought. Michael's cybersecurity team had flagged the link days earlier, and every interaction in the room was being monitored. Director Carter, Karen Whitaker, said during a briefing the next morning, "We've tracked Lawson's activity. He's been engaging with known extremist groups online." Michael leaned forward, his expression grave. "Is he sharing anything sensitive?" "Not yet," Karen replied. "But he's being fed misinformation that could push him to act. It's a powder keg waiting to explode." Michael exhaled slowly. Then it's time to bring him in. Meanwhile, the tension in Maplewood reached a boiling point. At a neighborhood association meeting, Henry showed up uninvited, clutching a stack of printed evidence he'd pulled from the chat room. "I have proof that Carter isn't who he says he is," Henry declared, slamming the papers onto the table. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Julia, who chaired the meeting. "Henry, this is not the time or place," she said firmly. "When is the time?" Henry shot back. "When it's too late? When he's already ruined this neighborhood?" A few murmurs of agreement rose from the crowd, but most residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Julia stood her ground. "Enough, Henry. You've caused enough trouble already. This meeting is about improving our community, not tearing it apart." Henry glared at her, but said nothing, his face red with frustration. That night, Michael's team executed their plan. Using the data they had gathered, they obtained a warrant to search Henry's computer. The search revealed his correspondence with Darren, his participation in the extremist chat room, and his plans to leak fabricated information to local media outlets. The following morning, FBI agents arrived at Henry's house with a warrant. The sight of the unmarked cars and agents in suits sent ripples through the neighborhood. Henry opened the door, his face pale but defiant. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. One of the agents handed him the warrant. "Mr. Lawson, we have reason to believe you've engaged in activities that threaten the safety and security of others. Step aside, please." Henry's protests were drowned out by the murmurs of onlookers gathering on the sidewalk. As the agents entered his house, he caught sight of Michael, watching from his driveway. For a moment, their eyes met. Henry's face twisted in anger, but Michael's expression remained calm, almost pitying. Inside his home, Michael returned to his family, who watched the scene unfold from the window. "Is it over?" Vanessa asked. Michael nodded slowly. "For now." But people like Henry don't just disappear. They find new ways to feed their hatred. Vanessa placed a hand on his shoulder. At least we've taken the first step, and we'll take the next one too. Michael glanced at Alana, who was watching quietly. You okay? He asked. She nodded, a determined look in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Dad. As the neighborhood began to process what had happened, Michael knew the fight wasn't truly over. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that truth and justice could prevail, even in the face of deep-seated prejudice. The aftermath of Henry Lawson's public unraveling left the neighborhood in an uneasy state. While some residents were relieved to see Henry face the consequences of his actions, others were more cautious, wary of being caught in what had become a highly publicized drama. The media frenzy following Henry's detention painted Maplewood as a battleground of suspicion and prejudice, leaving its residents grappling with questions about community, trust, and accountability. For Michael Carter, the immediate danger had been mitigated, but the emotional toll lingered. He spent long hours in his home office, going over reports and strategizing with his team. The situation had not only tested his ability to lead, but also his faith in the principles he had dedicated his career to protecting. One evening, as Michael worked late into the night, Vanessa entered the office, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. Michael, she said softly, you need to take a break. You've been at this for days. Michael rubbed his temples, leaning back in his chair. I know, Vanessa, but this isn't over. The chatter online hasn't stopped. If anything, it's getting worse. There are still people out there who believe Henry's lies. Vanessa crossed her arms. And what about us? Alana and I are trying to hold everything together while you're buried in work. We're just as scared as you are, but we need you here too. Her words hit Michael hard. He stood and walked over to her, taking her hands in his. You're right, he admitted. I've been so focused on fixing this that I haven't been present for you and Alana. I'll do better. Vanessa nodded, her eyes softening. We're in this together, Michael. Don't forget that. Meanwhile, Henry's situation grew increasingly precarious. Released on bail, he returned to a house that felt less like a home and more like a prison. The once friendly neighbors now avoided him entirely, and his mailbox overflowed with hate mail from those who had read about his actions in the news. But it wasn't just external pressure that weighed on Henry. Alone in his dimly lit living room, he found himself replaying the events of the past weeks in his mind. His conviction that Michael Carter was a threat had driven him to extremes. But now he was left to confront the damage he had caused, not only to his reputation, but to his own sense of self. Late one night, Henry logged into the chat room where he had first connected with Darren. The space that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed sinister. He read through the messages, many of which urged him to continue his fight against Michael. But one message stood out. Henry, you've done enough. Leave it alone before it gets worse. For the first time, Henry felt a pang of doubt. Was it worth it? Was his pride and paranoia worth the price he had paid? At the Carter home, Alana continued to struggle with the fallout of the situation. One day, during lunch at school, a classmate approached her, a boy named Ethan, who had always been polite but distant. Hey, Alana, Ethan said, his voice hesitant. I just wanted to say, I think what your dad's doing is really brave. Standing up to people like Lawson takes guts. Alana blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected kindness. Thanks, she said cautiously. Not everyone sees it that way. Ethan nodded. I know. My dad thinks Lawson was out of line, but not everyone in the neighborhood does. It's complicated. Yeah, Alana replied, her voice soft. Complicated. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope that even amidst the chaos, there were people willing to see her family for who they truly were. But the situation took a darker turn when Michael's security team intercepted another threat, this time a coordinated plan by an extremist group to target the Carter family directly. The group had been emboldened by Henry's actions and was now using his rhetoric as a rallying cry. At FBI headquarters, Corinne Whitaker burst into Michael's office with the report. Director Carter, we've identified a credible threat against your family, she said, her tone urgent. Michael's face darkened. Details? The group plans to disrupt your family's safety directly, possibly a home invasion or public confrontation. They've been monitoring your movements and even made contact with local sympathizers. Michael clenched his fists. Henry's rhetoric is fueling this. Whether he knows it or not, he's complicit. Karen hesitated. Do we escalate? Bring him in for questioning? Michael shook his head. Not yet. If we act too soon, we risk giving these groups more ammunition. But double the security detail at the house. And I want eyes on Lawson 24/7. That evening, Michael gathered his family in the living room. He explained the situation as calmly as he could, but the gravity of his words was unmistakable. Things may get worse before they get better, he said. But I promise you, we're doing everything we can to keep you safe. Vanessa took his hand. We trust you, Michael. Alana, though clearly frightened, nodded. We'll get through this, Dad. Together. Michael smiled faintly, his resolve hardening. Yes, we will. The tension in Maplewood reached a fever pitch as the extremist group's plans became clearer. Despite increased security, the Carter family lived with the constant threat of violence. For Michael, the personal and professional stakes had never been higher. He was determined to protect his family and prove that truth and justice could prevail, but the odds felt insurmountable. At dawn one morning, Michael's phone buzzed with an urgent notification from Karen Whitaker. The extremist group had posted a cryptic message online, implying a coordinated action against Michael's home that very night. Michael stared at the message, his jaw tightening. The threat was escalating faster than anticipated. He immediately convened his security team, issuing orders to reinforce their defenses. Tonight isn't just about protecting my family, Michael said firmly. We need to catch these people in the act. If we can take down this group, we send a message to everyone watching. There are consequences for hate and violence. Karen nodded. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement. I'll have agents stationed in plain clothes around the perimeter. Good, Michael replied. Make sure every angle is covered. While the FBI prepared for the operation, Henry Lawson sat alone in his home, oblivious to the chaos he had set in motion. Over the past few days, the messages from the extremist group had grown more aggressive. Though Henry hadn't actively contributed to their plans, he knew his rhetoric had given them fuel. The realization left Henry in turmoil. For the first time, he questioned whether his actions had gone too far. His suspicions about Michael Carter had always been rooted in fear and resentment, but now those feelings had spiraled into something much darker, something he wasn't sure he could control. As he mulled over his choices, Henry's phone buzzed with another message from the group. Tonight's the night. We're counting on you to hold the line. Henry stared at the screen, his stomach churning. What have I done? He whispered to himself. As night fell, the Carter home was a fortress of unseen defenses. Plainclothes FBI agents patrolled the perimeter, while Michael monitored the situation from his home office. Vanessa and Alana stayed upstairs, keeping the lights low as instructed. Around midnight, the first sign of trouble appeared, a dark SUV slowly cruising down the street. Michael watched from his surveillance feed as the vehicle stopped a few houses away. Two figures emerged, dressed in black and carrying what appeared to be tools for breaking and entering. Michael's voice was calm, but firm as he spoke into his radio. Target confirmed. Stand by for interception. The figures crept toward the house, moving along the shadows. As they reached the Carter family's backyard, floodlights snapped on, and FBI agents emerged from their hiding spots, weapons drawn. Freeze, an agent shouted. Hands in the air. The intruders hesitated for a moment before bolting in opposite directions. One was quickly tackled by an agent, while the other made it to the street, only to be intercepted by another team. The arrests were swift and decisive, but the operation wasn't over yet. The suspects' phones were immediately confiscated, revealing text messages and group chats that implicated several others in the plot. Michael reviewed the evidence in real time, his expression grim. This goes deeper than we thought, he said to Karen over the phone. We'll need to move quickly to dismantle the entire network, Karen agreed. Understood. I'll have a task force ready by morning. Across the street, Henry watched the scene unfold from his window. The sight of armed agents and arrested suspects left him paralyzed with guilt. He realized that his actions had directly contributed to this chaos and could have resulted in tragedy. Unable to bear the weight of his conscience, Henry made a decision. He threw on a coat and walked across the street to Michael's house, his heart pounding with every step. Michael met Henry at the door, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "Henry," he said, his voice neutral. "What do you want?" Henry hesitated, his eyes darting to the ground. I came to apologize," he said finally, "for everything. I didn't realize how far this would go." Michael folded his arms, studying the man before him. "You didn't realize, or you didn't care." Henry flinched at the words, but didn't argue. "I was wrong," he admitted. "About you, about everything. I let my fear get the better of me, and I hurt you and your family in ways I can't take back." Michael's gaze softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "Fear is no excuse for what you've done, Henry. Your actions could have cost lives." "I know," Henry said, his voice trembling, "and I'm willing to make it right, whatever it takes." Michael studied him for a moment before nodding. "If you mean that, then start by cooperating. Tell us everything you know about these people you've been working with. Names, locations, plans, everything." Henry nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'll do it. I'll tell you everything." With Henry's cooperation, the FBI was able to dismantle the extremist network that had threatened Michael and his family. The arrests made headlines, and Michael's integrity was vindicated. Though the ordeal had been harrowing, it ultimately brought a sense of justice, not only for the Carter family, but for the community as a whole. The dawn after the arrests brought a rare moment of quiet to Maplewood. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling the sounds of the neighborhood. Inside the Carter home, Michael sat at the kitchen table with Vanessa and Alana, sipping coffee as they shared a moment of relief. For the first time in weeks, the looming threat had been neutralized. The FBI's swift action, bolstered by Henry's cooperation, had dismantled the extremist network that targeted them. Dozens of arrests were made across the region, and the operation was lauded as a decisive victory against domestic terrorism. But for Michael, the personal toll remained. Later that morning, Henry Lawson arrived at the Carter home, escorted by two plainclothes FBI agents. He clutched a small folder of documents, his written statement detailing his involvement with the conspiracy, and the names of the individuals he had interacted with. Michael opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Henry," he said curtly. Henry stepped inside, glancing nervously at Vanessa, who stood at a distance, her arms crossed protectively. Alana watched from the staircase, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "I just want to say," Henry began, but Michael raised a hand to stop him. "You've said enough," Michael interrupted. "What matters now is what you do moving forward." Henry swallowed hard and handed Michael the folder. "This is everything I know. I'm ready to face the consequences." Michael took the folder, his gaze piercing. "You should be. But understand this, Henry. Words have power. What you started wasn't just a personal vendetta. It became a weapon for people with far darker intentions." Henry nodded, his face pale. "I know, and I'm truly sorry." Michael stared at him for a long moment before finally saying, "We'll see." The following days brought a whirlwind of activity. The media covered the arrests extensively, highlighting the FBI's success and Michael's role in protecting his family and the community. While some outlets framed the story as a testament to resilience and justice, others lingered on the divisive nature of the ordeal, sparking debates about race, privilege, and accountability. In Maplewood, the Carter family began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now approached with words of support and apologies. Julia even organized a small gathering to formally welcome the Carters to the neighborhood. Standing in the center of their living room, Michael addressed the group. "I want to thank those of you who've supported my family through this," he said, his voice steady. "This experience has shown us the best and worst of what community can be. But it's also reminded me why I do what I do, why I've dedicated my life to protecting the values this country stands for. My family didn't move here to make a statement. We came here for the same reason any of you did, to build a life, to feel safe, and to be part of something bigger. I hope that moving forward, We can all work to make Maplewood a place where everyone feels that way." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time since their arrival, Michael felt a glimmer of belonging. For Henry, the path to redemption was more complex. Though his cooperation had helped dismantle the network, it did not absolve him of responsibility. He faced legal consequences for his role in spreading misinformation and aiding extremists, and his relationship with the community was irrevocably damaged. In a quiet moment before his sentencing, Henry penned a letter to Michael. "Michael, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you understand that I truly regret my actions. Fear blinded me, and I let it turn me into someone I never wanted to be. What you've shown me, through your strength and your integrity, is that it's never too late to change. I hope to prove that in the years to come. Sincerely, Henry." Michael read the letter in his office, his expression softening. He placed it in his desk drawer, alongside other reminders of the challenges he'd overcome. As the weeks turned into months, life in Maplewood settled into a new rhythm. The Carter family, once viewed with suspicion, became an integral part of the community. Alana found her place among her peers, excelling in school and forging new friendships. Vanessa resumed her work as a consultant, using her expertise to support local organizations. Michael, though forever changed by the ordeal, felt a renewed sense of purpose. His family's resilience had proven that truth and justice could prevail, even in the face of deep-seated prejudice and fear. On a crisp spring morning, as Michael watched Alana leave for school and Vanessa tend to their blossoming garden, he felt a quiet sense of triumph. They had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Standing on his porch, Michael spotted Julia walking her dog across the street. She waved, and he waved back, a simple gesture carrying more meaning than words ever could. This was home now, and no one could take that away. The story of Michael Carter and his family resonated far beyond Maplewood. It became a case study in resilience and a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and misinformation. Michael's leadership in dismantling a dangerous extremist network not only protected his family, but also reminded the community and the country of the power of accountability, courage, and truth. The experience inspired Michael to speak publicly about the challenges his family faced. At a national conference on community resilience, he shared his perspective. "Fear thrives in the absence of understanding," Michael said to a captivated audience. "When we let fear dictate our actions, we create divisions that harm us all. It's our responsibility to confront those fears, not with anger or hatred, but with education, empathy, and action." His speech earned a standing ovation and sparked a national conversation about combating bias and fostering unity in divided communities. To the audience hearing this story today, reflect on the power of your words and actions. Whether spoken or shared online, words have immense power. Use them to uplift, educate, and connect rather than to spread fear or hate. Embrace diversity. Communities thrive when people of different backgrounds come together with mutual respect and understanding. Make an effort to learn about those who are different from you. Stand against prejudice. If you witness acts of discrimination or bias, speak up. Change begins when individuals take a stand. Support justice. Engage with organizations and initiatives that work to combat hate and misinformation. Together, we can build safer, stronger communities. If you found this story meaningful, consider sharing it with others. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. Together, let's keep these conversations alive and work toward a brighter future. What topic would you like us to explore in the next story? Share your thoughts below. Until next time, take care and be the change you wish to see.